I'm going to go back and look at some of these. Perhaps if you think God has a personality, God has flaws like man, and that's why they're suffering. I've often wondered about God's suffering. I had an experience of the spiritual realm that was very heavenly and blissful, but I've also had a sort of hellish experience of the spirit realm. And it's kind of clued me into this idea that, I don't know how to talk about God's existence as a period of time, because I don't think we can know enough about God to be able to answer certain kind of questions, that human beings might want to ask. Like, does God have a beginning? It appears that the universe did. The Bible seems to support that. I'm not going to get lost in that question, but I guess, in my hellish experience, I did come across this idea that God has suffered. God may have suffered in ways that we can't imagine. I became very aware of the loneliness of God during one of these hellish experiences. Suffering is part of nature, clearly. Like, it clearly is. Right? There's so much about what's happening in nature that is just utter suffering. The universe seems to be built around suffering. So I imagine that suffering must be an integral part of God. But that is kind of speculative. I know that when I was in the spirit realm, there was this idea that nothing was missing. Unlike in the earthly realm where something is always missing. In terms of oxygen, you have to breathe. Your physical body has requirements. There's always something that needs to be done, whether you have to go pee, you might have to eat a meal, I don't know. But there's always something that needs to be done. But that in the spiritual realm, there's nothing missing in the spiritual realm. I got into this thing earlier when I first started because it was on my mind about non-duality and people trying to look at the universe or existence through this non-dual lens. But to me, there's still awareness there. There's always awareness. Awareness automatically triggers the duality problem because I don't think it's a problem, but if you think it's a problem, then it's a problem. I don't think duality is a problem to be solved. So that is why I do feel like this is a war. And part of that war is overcoming obstacles. I believe that, there are things that are much bigger that are being played out and that we are co-creating in that. When you're talking about, like, is God limitless? Does God have infinite power? Can God create a stone so heavy you can't lift it? All these questions are interesting thought experiments, but even my experience in the spiritual realm gave me this idea that even the angels, there's a similar mystery about God. In the spirit realm, that part of the equation that we're missing becomes so obvious that everything suddenly clicks into place. But there is a notion in Christianity, you arrive in the spirit realm as a dead human being, and you are given a moment to accept the truth. Meaning, like, the truth is made known to you, and you can accept it, or you can try to ignore it. I directly experienced this, upon encountering this being. The truth about the universe was just plain and obvious, and it was so obvious that it triggered laughter. It was sort of like, no way. Like, this was all sort of telepathic. A lot of the things that I was experiencing were realizations that required time to, like, zoom in and explore. The memory I have is, like, on one level it lasted for like 10 seconds. On another level it lasted like thousands of years. There was this immediate reaction of, like, the truth is known. it's suddenly obvious. That's kind of a strong correlation with a lot of different religions that talk about that kind of thing. And Swedenborg, who I'm a big fan of because of certain synchronicities, I try to be good about this. Like, if I say something that I didn't discover myself, I'll try to say, like, yes, this is from Swedenborg. And I get a lot of, I think, clarification from what Swedenborg wrote. That, yeah, like, if you genuinely love God, truth, and wisdom, and you want to be aligned with those things, and the idea of that inspires, excites you, and you want to devote yourself to increasing knowledge, increasing truth and wisdom, then yeah, like even Swedenborg says, it takes a special kind of person to turn God away. Once the truth becomes known to you, you either, kind of want to fall on your knees and repent. But if you're still trapped by the ego, if you have done things in your life that you can't reconcile, and that you are still stuck in a post-traumatic loop, in the spirit realm, everything that's on the inside in this realm, like your thoughts and emotions, are on the outside in the spirit realm. So like in our earthly lives, our emotions and our thoughts are really our own. We can share them. They are contagious to some degree, but they're personal. They're inside us. We experience emotions as a feeling in our physical body. We experience thoughts in our minds as, they're conceptual, ethereal narratives and other things. Like, they're not physical. As far as we can tell, it's energy. It's the very fabric of space itself, I believe, is that what contains the spiritual realm. But that we exist there now. We are accessing it in our minds through our imagination. And I think that is exactly what's happening to us when we're dreaming. We are in the spirit realm, the place where we will spend eternity, for better or worse. And that the dream realm is let's call it a neighborhood of the spiritual realm. I guess that's the struggle, is that if you've ignored the spiritual dimension of life, you've done things you haven't tried to reconcile, and you've never sort of paid attention to the natural self-correcting mechanisms that are trying to keep us in alignment and harmonious and balanced, then in the afterlife, yeah, it's going to be hard. This is the place to learn balance. Swedenborg does say that there are spirits and angels that will try to help some of these people that can be helped. But he also alludes to this idea that there are some people who can't be helped and that they are lost. I find that disturbing, but it's also like, I had a hellish experience in the spirit realm. And it does appear that in the same way that there is a beauty and a horror to the physical realm, there is clearly a beauty and a horror to the spiritual realm. And I'm sorry to give you that news, because it does mean that some of us, myself included, we got work to do. And we might have to continue that work in the spiritual realm.